Hey, good afternoon to you. It's 4:06 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we are making sense of the news. Coming up on the program, Matthew Continetti joins us at 5 o'clock, founded the Free Beacon. We will chat with him about why Gen Z is all in on President Trump. They like him. They like the guy, it turns out. And you can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. President Trump is having now to battle it out with a series of judges who are all trying to meddle in the affairs of the Trump administration, issuing a variety of nationwide injunctions from places like Rhode Island, declaring that President Trump is not allowed to move forward with his agenda and all sorts of very important things. Among the fights he's having right now, that the president's having right now, is with a judge who decided to dive in and block the Secretary of the Treasury from being able to access Treasury Department records. Yeah, that's as crazy as it sounds. U.S. District Judge Paul Engelmayer issued an injunction after 19 Democrat attorneys general sued President Trump on Saturday, blocking the ability of political appointees, that would include the Secretary of the Treasury, to have access to the Treasury Department's files. What? Meanwhile, the Trump team has responded, this is way overboard. This judge is completely out of order. This is completely unconstitutional. And that the Treasury Secretary should have access to the records at the Treasury. For more on this, I want to bring in Brett Tolman. He's a former U.S. attorney, executive director of Right on Crime. Brett, good to have you back with us, sir.
Thank you for having me. Great to be with you.
Am I missing anything here? What's going on if the Treasury Secretary isn't allowed to see the government records at the Treasury?
Yeah. Well, I guess in one way it's not surprising. When you have judges that, when you have activist judges, they have power and they're going to use that power. And they'd rather use that power unconstitutionally and make this administration take it up the appellate chain, eventually, perhaps having to take it to the Supreme Court in order to reverse them. I guess they see that as their role, as opposed to what you would hope the judges are doing, which is, regardless of their politics, that they're going to assess the facts. And the facts in this particular case is not even close. I mean, you're talking the head of the executive branch, the president of the United States, asking to see executive branch records. I don't know about you, but I'd hate to be the lawyer that takes that up to an appellate court.
Yeah, so a judge gets in the way and interferes. I get that the judicial branch is supposed to assess violations of law, and then these are supposed to be checks and balances. But what this seems like is a one random U.S. district judge is straight up interfering in the power of the executive branch for political purposes.
Yes. And it's aggravating because you have a lifetime appointment, and the only consolation is that there is a mechanism for holding these judges accountable, and that is the appellate review, and why we have appellate courts, and then why we have ultimately a Supreme Court. And it takes that, because this is not the first time, nor will it be the last time, that an activist judge inserts themselves just because they don't like some policy of the Trump administration.
Yeah, I mean, Elon Musk is suggesting today that maybe we should go so far as to invoke the impeachment clause and say, okay, well, maybe this judge needs to be impeached if they're going to be this abusive.
Yeah, I think, it's there for a reason, and it's not used, and it should be used. And if you get a good ruling out of the appellate court, it could really help an effort to impeach a judge. But that's what you're going to need. Otherwise, they have total power and control of their courtroom, and they have total power in terms of, protecting themselves against impeachment.
Now, these nationwide injunctions, these sort of sweeping blockades on the power of the presidency, what's your view of these, Brett Tolman, that a single judge can upend the agenda of a duly elected president?
Well, there have been times where it's been very important, actually, that power and that ability. If you recently look what Judge O'Connor, for example, did in Texas, he single-handedly saved the country from overreach by ATF and a blatant infringement on the Second Amendment. And he was able to basically enjoin ATF from expanding laws that Congress would have to do in order to an attempt to try to get citizens guns, certain guns, firearms.
Sure.
So there have been instances in which it's been very important to have that ability because of abuse that can occur. But what I don't like to see is in O'Connor's, you have very clear rule of law, and he cites the facts and the law, and it's supported, and it got upheld on appeal. So it tells you he was doing what was right when multiple, other judges reviewed what he did.
Yeah.
Here, what we're going to see is the appellate court is going to say, this is outrageous. This is an unconstitutional overreach. This is, and throw it out. And you hope that happens and happens quickly. But unfortunately, if you see that more often happening just, with the Trump administration, while it wouldn't be surprising, it is very damaging and it ruins the credibility and of the judicial system and the judicial branch. And we start to feel very uneasy about, whether they really are able to interpret the facts and the law and set their political leanings aside.
On the fact that this judge Engelmayer has blocked even the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent from accessing these files, the Trump team responded here, the Justice Department, saying there's no sound reason that it should extend to Treasury's leadership, who are charged with overseeing and administering the department without interruption. To the extent the order applies to senior political appointees at Treasury, it is an extraordinary and unprecedented judicial interference with a cabinet secretary's ability to oversee the department he was constitutionally appointed to lead. It does seem pretty clean. I mean, it's open and shut that the judge seems like he's overreaching here.
Yes, absolutely it is. And so, I predict a quick reversal. But I think there should be a complaint filed against the judge with there's a division of the judiciary branch that accepts complaints, and I think they ought to be looking into impeachment. I think all that has to happen because you have to put on notice not just this judge but other judges that if they're willing to put their political bias in their opinions, we are going to go after them.
Yeah.
And we're going to expose them, and we're going to try to deter others from doing it.
Brett Tolman, this weekend, Vice President J.D. Vance expressed on X, he said the following. He said, if a judge tried to tell a general how to conduct a military operation, that would be illegal. If a judge tried to command the attorney general in how to use her discretion as a prosecutor, that's also illegal. Judges aren't allowed to control the executive's legitimate power. J.D. Vance says this as a lawyer himself. What do you make of the vice president's take here?
Well, think about what a judge could do if we allowed this to take place. A judge could enjoin the Department of Justice to not pursue immigration violations, right? And you can think of all kinds of situations in which the will of one man or woman with a robe gets placed onto an executive who has a constitutional power that is clearly granted to it and is tasked with enforcing the law in that constitutional authority. And we would then resort to chaos, and you'd start to see these judges' rulings lose their ability to actually be respected, and then we usher in a new era of chaos into the country. So this is very important beyond just this moment in time. The judiciary is going to lose its ability and the confidence that people have in them, and the respect that they've enjoyed for so many hundreds of years.
There are other cases where judges are fighting with the Trump administration too. One of them involves the fact that the Trump administration has ordered federal grants to be frozen. They're trying to assess what money's going out the door before they turn everything back on. A federal judge today said that the White House has defied his order to release all of those federal grants, billions of dollars. The New York Times says it marks the first time a judge has expressly declared that the Trump White House is disobeying a judicial mandate. Brett, what happens here if the Trump administration basically tells this judge to pound sand and continues to freeze all of this funding, and the judge is saying, you better release all that funding? You know, what could possibly happen as these two sides square off?
Well, what should happen is an immediate ruling before the Supreme Court. Because what you have is a judicial branch who has no more authority to control the executive branch. You know, the ability of the president, for example, to decide what the executive branch is going to spend on or not. That's absolute authority that the president has. He's the head of the executive branch. So what you have is two branches of the government with power saying they have to do something one way, and the other saying, no, we're going to do it this way. And what we have learned historically and in our Constitution is that when that happens, it has to be resolved by the Supreme Court. So I would expect that that's, an automatic grant by the Supreme Court to hear the case.
So, and then that falls to whose judgment? Is that any one of the justices who can do that, or is this something for the Chief Justice to handle?
No, so they would have 4 justices would have to agree to hear the case. 4 out of the 9 would have to agree to hear the case. And if they get 4, then they can, go forward. My guess is they will get more than 4.
Yeah. I mean, they should just go ahead and take one of these cases now, because you and I both know that all of these cases are at some point going to be up in the Supreme Court. They may as well just dive on one to set the precedent here.
Yes, absolutely. And let's let everyone in on a secret here. The Trump team, the administration, DOJ, all the lawyers, they were ready for this fight. They expect this fight, and they are very prepared for this fight.
And they want it, is what you're saying. And that includes
Absolutely.
that includes that birthright citizenship fight that we're seeing right now, as multiple judges keep saying that what Trump is doing is, quote, unconstitutional, as Trump says that illegal aliens are not entitled to U.S. citizenship just by having kids here. It's being battled out in the courts. It seems to me, Brett, that's by design. The Trump administration wants this battle in the courts.
They do, and they're allowed to. And the reason they're allowed to is because you can believe that the 14th Amendment is very clear on this and believe one way, but you're also allowed to test the law. You're allowed to bring cases to test the accuracy of how the law is being interpreted and enforced, and that's what they are doing. And there are exceptions that fall outside of that grant in the 14th Amendment to citizenship. So they are exploring what that 14th Amendment means, and does it apply universally to individuals that come here to and give birth, illegals that come into the country and give birth. The issue has not squarely been resolved, and it needs to be resolved. And so that's why they're pursuing it.
All right. Brett Tolman, former U.S. Attorney, Executive Director with Right on Crime. Sir, thank you for your analysis today. Always nice to talk to you, sir. Hey, good afternoon to you. It's now 4:35 News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up on the program, Matthew Continetti will join us. He'll talk about Gen Z's affection for President Trump. Some big poll numbers this week. And you can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Okay, so this is fun. The left, in its desire to create scandals, has another one that they're spazzing out over, which is they claim that it is scandalous for a sitting United States Supreme Court justice to administer the oath of office to incoming cabinet officials. It's scandalous. Listen to this CNN segment where they began claiming, I think this was Thursday, this aired this past week, they began claiming that it's a big deal that Justice Clarence Thomas is swearing everybody in, and it's very scandalous. You can tell by the music bed they chose. It's menacing.
Rarely do we see Supreme Court justices in this role, but in recent days, Clarence Thomas has sworn in 5 of President Trump's cabinet officials. Traditionally, most new cabinet officials are sworn in by the vice president, But we've learned that President Trump specifically asked for Clarence Thomas for some of these oath ceremonies. Trump even praised Justice Thomas and his wife, Ginny, who is a longtime conservative activist, at the swearing-in ceremony for Pam Bondi.
I'm going to just pause and let you catch your breath here if you're having trouble. I know this is a lot to handle. I can't even believe this. Is this our country? Is this even really our country anymore?
To be Attorney General.
And I'd also like to thank Justice Clarence Thomas and his incredible wife, who's here someplace. There she is. Toward the end of my first term.
Now, let me pause for a moment and just give you a scenario. Let's pretend that Joe Biden had asked Ketanji Brown Jackson to help him swear in a variety of officials. Do you think that the CNN segment would be, "This is very dangerous and dark and scary"? Do you think that's what the message from the CNN segment on the subject would be? No, it wouldn't. It would be about how historic it is. It would have, the music would be light. It would be airy. It would be enthusiastic. It would be forward-looking. It'd be like, wow, what a great country.
I was introducing a lot of people at a big event, about 5,000 people. And then I introduced Justice Clarence Thomas. The place went crazy. And it was then that I realized that you are a very popular guy and respected guy.
From Pam Bondi to Kristi Noem at Thomas's own home, to Scott Turner at the White House, and Doug Collins and Sean Duffy at the Supreme Court. It's very unusual for a justice to spend this amount of time with cabinet officials and to also be at the White House with the president. This all comes at a time when federal courts are already scrutinizing many of Donald Trump's executive orders, some of which are bound to end up at the Supreme Court. Thomas, the eldest of the 9 justices, has pushed this court to the hard right.
You know, it's funny. It's totally fine for a random federal judge to upend the entire Trump administration and literally block the Treasury Secretary from having access to the files of the Treasury Department. But if you administer the oath of office as a Supreme Court justice, well, let me tell you, mister, you're in for a CNN panic segment.
He has particularly pressed for limits on individual rights, such as the 2022 decision that reversed Roe v. Wade. During Trump's first term, Justice Thomas and his wife, Ginny, dined privately with Trump.
Oh, my
Ginny
goodness.
Thomas was regularly in touch with White House officials during that first term, and she pressed them to challenge the 2020 election results.
Yeah, he better get his wife under control. That's the CNN message. Don't you let your wife have her own ideas. Go out there and say things that she feels like saying. What do you think this is? America? It's amazing. So, is there precedent for Supreme Court justices swearing in members of the cabinet? Does any such precedent exist? Because in the CNN block that I just played for you, they say, oh, this is a very rare thing. This almost never happens. This is deeply unusual. Really? It's deeply unusual. Okay. Let's see. Let's see how unusual it is. So they claim that it's always the vice president who swears everybody in. Let me just go back in time here. Bill Barr, sworn in by Chief Justice John Roberts, 2019. Loretta Lynch, Attorney General, sworn in by Justice Sonia Sotomayor in 2015. Eric Holder wasn't even sworn in by a Supreme Court justice. In fact, it was D.C. Superior Court Judge Robert Richter, 2009. Judge Merrick Garland was sworn in by the assistant, excuse me, not judge. He was previously a judge, but then Merrick Garland was sworn in as Attorney General by the Assistant Attorney General. So just random people. Who else? Hillary Clinton was sworn in by a D.C. Court of Appeals Associate Judge, Catherine Oberle. Condoleezza Rice was sworn in by Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Supreme Court Justice. John Ashcroft was sworn in by, Clarence Thomas. Clarence Thomas. Look, there he is again. When John Ashcroft was sworn in as Attorney General of the United States. You know, it's funny, I went back and I read the ABC News coverage from that, and it is just as insane as this CNN package is. But this is back in 2001. Dateline Washington, February 2nd. Yes, it's official. John Ashcroft was sworn in Thursday afternoon as the 79th Attorney General of the United States. The private ceremony took place at the Supreme Court with Justice Clarence Thomas officiating. No one could recall any time another cabinet member has been sworn in at that location. It is, of course, perfectly natural that Ashcroft would have sought out Thomas for the ceremony. They're longtime Missouri buds, having both worked for former Senator John Danforth, Republican, Missouri. But it could hardly have seemed comforting to those who worried about Ashcroft's ardent right-wing views for him to have chosen one of the most conservative justices for this honor. Listen, poor Justice Thomas. All he does is administer an oath, and they turn it into a full-blown scandal. And even more than Chief Justice William Rehnquist or Justice Antonin Scalia, Thomas is a thorn in the side of the black civil rights community. ABC is whining. This is back in 2001. Those who have been the most vocal in their alarm about Ashcroft's ascendancy to the country's top law enforcement position. This is back in 2001. It's the same story. The characters change a little bit, and they just keep attacking Justice Thomas, no matter what. Now, I just read to you a bunch of other justices who have all sworn in different cabinet members. There was no scandal around any of that. Justice Thomas does it. It's a scandal. We've got to destroy him. Who else? Alberto Gonzalez was sworn in by Sandra Day O'Connor, AG. Ed Meese was sworn in by Chief Justice Warren Burger. That was 1985. Janet Reno was also sworn in by Justice Byron White in 1993. Elizabeth Dole, Secretary of Transportation, sworn in by Sandra Day O'Connor. That was 1983. William French Smith, Attorney General, sworn in by Justice Warren Burger, 1981. And now you ready for this? So you've heard me mention a lot of attorneys general who've been sworn in by Supreme Court justices. Now you ready for other members of the cabinet? Jimmy Carter's almost his entire cabinet was sworn in by a sitting Supreme Court justice, Warren Burger, back in 1977, January 23rd of 1977. The following officials were sworn in by Warren Burger: Secretary of State Vance, Secretary of the Treasury Blumenthal, Secretary of Defense Brown, Attorney General Bell, Secretary of the Interior Andrews, Secretary of Agriculture Berglund, Secretary of Commerce Krebs, Secretary of Labor Marshall, Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare Califano, Secretary of Transportation Adams, and Secretary of Housing and Urban Development Harris. All sworn in by a sitting United States Supreme Court justice. Now, let me just take you back to where we started. Is it a scandal that Clarence Thomas is doing the clerical work of administering an oath? No, not in the slightest. But CNN wants you to think it is. So there you go. There's a little bit of history you can use. Do you know how hard it is to actually track down the data I just shared with you? Not to toot my own horn. It was super annoying to try and figure out who swore in who over time. And I've only gone back half a century here. There's a lot more American history available to us that we could probably dig into. And it reminded me, by the way, this is one of those stories where I decided, I was like, there's not a good resource on this anywhere on the internet. I wonder if artificial intelligence can spit out an answer. So I tried all of them. I tried OpenAI. I was having trouble with OpenAI, but I tried, what's the Google one? Google Gemini. I tried Gemini today. I tried Grok. I was rooting for Grok. I was rooting for it. I said, come on, Grok, you're the Elon Musk one. None of them could give me I was straight up arguing with the AI by the end of it. And I was like, wait a second, you forgot this person. Oh, you're right, I forgot that person. That's true, that's a good point. But you also forgot this person. Yeah, you're right. I literally started arguing with the AI. I was like, now you're getting lazy on me. And then it started apologizing. So just a reminder, if you ask AI a question and it gives you an answer, in some cases, I had to fact check all of this. In some cases, it straight up lied to me. It claimed that it was the Chief Justice who swore that person, and it wasn't. It was some other justice on the Supreme Court. So, couple of lessons here. 1, CNN's lying to you. 2, CNN's lying to you. 3, when you use AI, double check its work. It may not get it right. It may not get it right. It's a useful starting indicator of where you should be looking. But beyond that, you can't cite it as a source. Please don't. And 4th, CNN's lying to you. Amazing. Also amazing, Pete Hegseth is in place at the Department of Defense, which is a lot of fun. He's been sharing all the videos of his interactions with Defense Department officials as he gives speeches on his goals for the Pentagon. Also take some questions there. But one of the things that he's committed to is getting the Pentagon to the point where it can actually pass an audit, which seems like a basic requirement, right? For one of the biggest line items in the entire budget. We spend tons of money on the United States Department of Defense. Don't you deserve to know how it's spent? Of course you do. Of course, you're an American voter. You deserve the answer to that question. But the left and institutional Washington broadly, they don't really want you to know how the Pentagon is spending money. The more scrutiny that you can give the government spending, the less they're going to be able to do, because once you find out the garbage that some of this money is being spent on, you're saying, we shouldn't be doing that. That's why they try and keep it out of sight. That's why there's no urgency to fix the payment systems to make it common sense so you can have an easy understanding of all of this. There's no urgency around that because they don't, up until now, there's really been very little desire to be held accountable. They don't want that. A year ago, Jon Stewart was talking to Joe Biden's Deputy Secretary of Defense, Kathleen Hicks, and she guffawed at the idea. She chortled. She laughed at the idea that the Pentagon needs to pass an audit. Oh, it's not even really a big deal, she said. And even Jon Stewart was like, actually, it is kind of a big deal. Why can't you pass an audit?
To be doing, like, there is a lot of waste, fraud, and abuse within a system.
Audits and waste, fraud, and abuse are not the same thing. So let's decompose these
Then please
pieces
educate me on
Sure.
What
so an audit is
is
exactly what you just described,
yes.
which is, do I know what was delivered to which place?
Right.
The ability to pass an audit or the fact that the DOD has not passed an audit is not suggestive of waste, fraud, and abuse. That is completely false right there. So
what is
now
it
it's a question of, it's suggestive that we don't have an accurate inventory that we can pull up of what we have where. That is not the same as saying we can't do that because waste, fraud, and abuse has occurred.
So in my world,
yeah,
that's waste.
How is that waste?
If I give you $1 billion and you can't tell me what happened to it, that to me is wasteful. That means you are not responsible. But if you can't tell me where it went, then what am I supposed to think?
Listen to her laughing in his face. Everything he's saying is deeply reasonable. The bare minimum is you can tell us how you spent that money, and it's way more than $1 billion. Way more. Tell us, how are you spending that money? Stupid Jon Stewart. You don't deserve to know.
And when there has been reporting, I mean, this is not, look, I'm not saying this is on you and that you caused this, but I think it's a tough argument to
I'm pretty
make
sure
that
I didn't cause it.
an $850 billion budget to an organization that can't.
Do you have? Is there any other category of government official you have more contempt for than the one who laughs in your face when you ask for accountability? It pretends like you don't deserve it at all.
Pass an audit and tell you where that money went, like, I think most people would consider that somewhere in the realm of waste, fraud, or abuse, because they would wonder why that money isn't well accounted for. And especially when they see food insecurity on military bases, and they see...
You want to talk about that? Because that's a good... We should be talking... I mean, well, I'm trying to understand where you're trying to go, other than the dollars, which really bother you.
I think it doesn't really bother me. I think it's all connected.
Okay.
I think
tell
look...
me that story. Tell me how you're thinking about that.
When I see a State Department get a certain amount of money and a military budget be 10 times that, and I see a struggle within government to get people like more basic services, and then that department that got that, I mean, we got out of 20 years of war and the Pentagon got a $50 billion raise. Like, that's shocking to me. Now, I may not understand exactly the ins and outs and the incredible magic of an audit, but I'm a human being who lives on the earth and can't figure out how $850 billion to a department means that the rank and file still have to be on food stamps. Like, to me, that's corruption. I'm sorry. And if that blows your mind, and if you think like that's like a crazy agenda for me to have, I really think that that's institutional thinking, and that it's not looking at the day-to-day reality of the people that you call the greatest fighting force in the world. So I get back to this idea of like, I'm not looking to pick a fight with you, but I am surprised at that the reaction to these questions are, you don't know what an audit is, bucko. Like, that's just weird to me.
Isn't it amazing? And she hates that he even asked. Okay, tell me more. Tell me more why you're even interested in this subject. I don't know. It's like one of the biggest elements of our entire budget, and you have no idea how you're spending the money. You should be fired. And thank God they were. All right, coming up, Matthew Continetti will join us in just moments. We're going to chat with him about why it is that Gen Z really likes Donald Trump for some reason. We'll find out why. That's ahead on the Vince Coglianese Show.